AI is pleased to host this discussion in collaboration with the strategic advisory firm Polytech. The conflict between Pakistan and Taliban-controlled Afghanistan is rapidly intensifying. The aim of this webinar is to try to understand what is occurring, what might happen in the near future, but also to place it in a wider context, namely the regional influences on the conflict and the conflict in turns influences on the region. With our discussion, we also hope to bring into the picture the United States and its evolving strategic interests in Afghanistan and Pakistan region and the region. Arif, did you want to say something now? Please
Yes,
introduce.
first of all, Marvin, I want to thank the Middle East Institute for collaborating once again with Polytech. We have over the years and I cover various aspects. We previously looked at the Middle East balance of power and how India and Pakistan were competing there. And we also looked at previously at the growing Chinese influence in the Middle East. And today we are looking at another important theme as you mentioned, the Afghanistan-Pakistan conflict and how that's playing out. So I look forward to an insightful discussion and would like to welcome all the panelists as well.
Thank you, Arif. Let me now introduce our panelists. Javed Ahmed is an associate fellow at the Middle East Institute. He is also a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's South Asia Center, focusing on security and counterterrorism, trans-regional militancy, and illicit networks. From 2020 to 2021, Javed served as Afghanistan's ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. Craig Karp is a managing director at Carpology Advisors. He is a seasoned U.S. diplomat with extensive frontline experiences in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central Asia, Russia, and the Middle East. His expertise includes government formation, human rights advocacy, electoral processes, and business development in complex political environments. David Sedney is president emeritus of the American University of Afghanistan. He was at AUAF, the president in Kabul twice, from 2016 to 2017 and 2019, 2021. And he continues to serve on the university's board of trustees. Earlier, David was assistant, deputy assistant secretary of defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia from 2009 to 2013. He was also the deputy assistant from 2007 to 9 and director of Afghanistan studies or Afghanistan at the National Security Council in 2003. Joshua White is a non-resident fellow in foreign policy program at Brookings and is the CV Star Distinguished Professor of Practice at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced Studies in Washington. He previously served in the White House and senior advisor for director for South Asia Affairs at the National Security Council. And Josh is joining us today from Bologna, Italy. Okay. Myself. I'm Marvin Weinbaum, senior fellow at Middle East Institute, where I specialize in following Afghanistan and Pakistan. I'm professor emeritus of political science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I directed the university's program in South Asian and Middle East Studies for 15 years. I was for 4 years the analyst for Afghanistan and Pakistan in the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. Before raising the questions to the panel, I'm going to invite them to make some brief remarks. So let's begin. Who'd like to start us off? That is a brief introductory remarks, and then we'll get to the questions. And let me also add, there will be an opportunity for questions from our viewing audience, and that opportunity, of course, is there for you during the course of the webinar to register that, and I'll be picking on people for picking at some of the questions as we get to the end of the program. So who'd like to start us off with a few words? David, how about you?
Sure. Well, as Marvin mentioned, I've spent a good part of the last 2 decades working on Afghanistan in Afghanistan. And I'm very concerned about the future of the Afghan people and continue to work on that as my primary activity. However, I think it's important to recognize that the Afghanistan-Pakistan conflict is only a subplot to the main plot of the India-Pakistan relationship and the associated geopolitical influences that bear on that conflict. Over the last 48 hours or so, with 2 explosions, one in Delhi and one in Islamabad, and the passage of a far-ranging constitutional amendment in Pakistan, which is perhaps ending any prospect of democracy in Pakistan, there are major events that are happening that will shape anything that happens between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Finally, I would point out that the conflict, the armed conflict, the exchange of fire that really, I think, occasioned this webinar, Marvin, a few weeks ago between Pakistan and Afghanistan on the border was immediately preceded by a wonderful, for him, 8-day visit by the Afghan so-called foreign minister Mutaki to India, where he was treated royally. And it was immediately upon the conclusion of that visit that the Pakistani attacks on Afghanistan happened. A lot of people saw that as a signal. So the beginning of these hostilities, in my mind, were directly related to Pakistan and India's rivalry that goes much beyond just Afghanistan. But that's my view. Of course, others will have a different view, but look forward to the discussion.
Right.
Maybe I'll jump in here. I generally agree with everything that David said. I myself have been familiar with Afghanistan for over 50 years and was assigned to Kabul, but never got there. Instead, went to Peshawar to work with the Mujahideen, and then was helped open the embassy in Kabul. When we went back, I was on the first plane of civilians into Afghanistan after the fall of the Taliban. But I think it's very important to note that you talk about the Afghanistan-Pakistan conflict. I personally believe it's more appropriate to define the conflict as between Pakistan and the Taliban, rather than with Afghanistan. The Taliban regime seized power by force without the support of the majority of the people of Afghanistan and maintained power through repression rather than domestic legitimacy. They've been recognized only by the Russian Republic. While they've made diplomatic gains, especially recently with India, their international legitimacy is still rather limited. I don't believe that the vast majority of the Afghan people agree with the approach of conflict with Pakistan. So I don't believe that they should be deemed a party to this conflict. I think that Pakistan has dealt with the accretion of deadly assaults by principally, but not entirely, Pakistani militants with patience. They've moved from private consultations to diplomatic pressure, to pushing refugees back, to various forms of economic pressure, before taking their own violent counteractions. Every day, just as, what was it, yesterday, Pakistanis are being killed by extremists who are training, arming um, in Afghanistan, and some of them, without question, have been funded by India. And this is a very serious international problem. I just want to say that 25 years ago, I advised my superiors and colleagues in the State Department that the way to solve the problems in Afghanistan was to solve the problems between Pakistan and India.
Okay. All right.
Thank
Josh,
you.
Josh, thoughts?
Sure. Sure. Thanks, Marvin, for convening us. Well, there's a lot happening between Afghanistan and Pakistan, but also as David rightly highlighted, in India as well, and risk to the India-Pakistan relationship. I'm glad we're having this conversation. I would just say it strikes me as timely and important because there are some dynamics here that are quite old, and there are some dynamics here that are newer. And I think the with respect to the old dynamics, it's important to remember it, as all of us try to remind ourselves that Afghanistan and Pakistan have had border conflicts and skirmishes and sometimes outright shelling dating back to the 50s and the early 60s, very violent cross-border conflicts. So in a sense, the patterns are repeating here in somewhat different form, but there's a longstanding history of various governments and actors in Afghanistan trying to find ways to deal with having a much larger and more powerful neighbor. There's also, I think, a long history which we see playing out here of Pakistan finding, to its surprise, although it should not be surprised, that its interventions in Afghanistan blow back and create problems for it down the road. And certainly, Pakistan's longstanding support for the Taliban during the 20-year conflict now has created a major headache for the Pakistani leadership. At the same time, I think there is something relatively new here, not new in the last month or year, but new as we look at the Taliban government, which is that we have a leadership in Kabul. We have a government that really does not respond to the kind of incentives that we are accustomed to governments responding to. Usually, when you analyze a conflict situation across a border, you sit down and you think to yourself, well, what leverage might various governments or various actors have over this party, and what levers might they have over that party? And when you look at the Taliban government, such as it is, and we'll probably talk about its incentive structures, there are very few points of leverage over that leadership, and that I think creates a fundamentally unique and difficult problem-solving exercise here in looking at the future trajectory of this conflict and what might help abate it.
Thank you. And Javed.
Sure. Well, thanks, Marvin. Thanks to Polytech, Arif. There's never a lot has been said already, but there's never a dull moment between those two countries. There's always something brewing there. But I think things really took a sharper turn in the past few months, especially after the Pakistani army came out of its own confrontation with India in May, and they felt emboldened of what it perceived was a win against India. And then pretty much everyone in Pakistan at the time, and still actually, credited Field Marshal Munir for that victory, and he's now, hard at work to cash in some of those brownie points, both politically and institutionally. And That's where I think the tension between Afghanistan and Pakistan and or the Taliban specifically comes into play. And there's a lot of conflicting information coming out from both sides. And it's really hard to kind of keep track of it or, keep track of who's doing what, especially after yesterday's attack, suicide attack in Islamabad and then in Delhi the day before. But to me, what's clear is that both sides have a long history of lying and spinning truth. So I'm afraid a lot of what we may be discussing or analyzing here today could well be, analyzing lies or those competing version of lies. That said, I think it would be important kind of to break down as to what each side wants, because that's where you really see where the friction lies. On the Pakistan side, first they want the Taliban to ensure that the Afghan soil isn't used by groups like TTP and groups like the Balochistan Liberation Army, the BLA, to attack Pakistan, and they want verifiable action, not promises. They've also demanded that key TTP figures be handed over to Pakistan. And Pakistan is saying that handover too has to happen properly through established channels instead of the Taliban quietly kind of pushing the TTP leaders across the border into Pakistan. The Taliban are of course pushing back, and they're saying that maybe some TTP families are here after being displaced by Pakistani's own operation in places like Waziristan, but the leaders, they aren't here. They are inside Pakistan, and that's the Taliban's own dilemma, is they can't publicly acknowledge the TTP's presence in Afghanistan because the minute they do, they would have to own it. Pakistan was also asking the Taliban for a religious fatwa to basically say that any jihad or any call for jihad against Pakistan by any group from Afghanistan is forbidden. And the Taliban are basically telling them that that's not our job. We can't quite do that, especially through a religious decree, because it's none of our business, first of all, to go out and religiously stamp who's good or a bad militant group. And secondly, that won't serve the purpose. And the other thing that Pakistan wants is a joint counterterrorism mechanism that effectively gives Pakistani army some oversight and involvement, and perhaps even a seat at the table of Afghan security. So the Taliban's response to that is that, but what's terrorism? Define it to me. And certainly they don't agree with that definition. From the Taliban side, their message to Pakistan is pretty clear, is that, TTP is your internal problem, go talk to them. If you're talking to us about TTP, then the TTP also needs to be in the room because we, as the Afghan Taliban, can negotiate on TTP's behalf or on anyone's behalf, be it BLA or other groups like Hafiz Gul Bahadur and others. And they've also told Pakistani side to clean up its own house, mainly to go after, ISIS Khorasan group inside Pakistan, which has really picked up its presence there. The Taliban have also reportedly shared intelligence with them, names, locations, audio recordings, coordinates, and the Pakistani side are basically saying, no, they aren't here, but the Taliban are telling them that if you can't do it or you won't go after these people, then let us handle it. Then there's a drone issue, the U.S. drone issue. The Taliban are basically accusing the Pakistanis for allowing those counterterrorism drones that U.S. is using through Pakistani airspace to surveil Afghanistan. And they say, oh, this Afghan violation of Afghan sovereignty. And so they're demanding from Pakistan is that if you can't stop it, then at least admit it publicly. And this, of course, is politically sensitive, even impossible for the Pakistani sides to do. And then there's also, of course, the trade and economic issues and how they need to be separated from political disputes. And of course, the political refugee or the refugee population in Afghanistan, how Pakistan needs to stop kind of weaponizing those as a leverage. So what basically the Pakistani side wants from the TTP at this point is some kind of a Doha-style agreement that the United States signed with the Taliban. So similar to that one, something that effectively binds the Taliban to restrain the TTP, if not fight them outright. So they're asking less about counter TTP or counterterrorism against TTP and more about containing them. And that's quite telling because by some estimates, you have nearly a quarter of Pakistani territory right now, which is under militant control, be it TTP or others. So that's pretty alarming.
Very good. Do any of you want to comment at all on the discussion thus far? Follow-up remarks. Go ahead.
If I could, this this situation speaks to one of the greatest geopolitical ironies of our generation, because the Taliban would not be sitting in power in Afghanistan if not for the shelter and support from the Pakistani military, government of Pakistan, particularly Pakistan Intelligence, ISI, over the years. It's in some ways also ironic for you to refer, Javed, to the Doha Agreement, which the Taliban have violated nearly every provision of, except for the refraining to attack U.S. forces during their period of withdrawal. But I think the main question on this issue is right now: are the Pakistanis beginning to question what they have done over the years by essentially putting the Taliban in power in Afghanistan, by supporting extremists, both in Afghanistan and also in face of India, whether this is good for Pakistan or not? And I think that is the principal question that we have to deal with at this moment.
Marvin, just to
Yeah,
add
yeah.
to this, that Javed
Please.
mentioned a couple of the items that TTP has been demanding, but one of their key demands is that, I think that's where it falls apart, is that they want the FATA merger to be rescinded within Pakistan, and the Pakistan military to withdraw from the previously FATA areas, and they want to implement their own version of the Sharia there. So that's where I think the negotiations fall apart, because that's a non-starter. I'll stop here just to add to the.
No, please
Yeah.
do. Please do.
Yeah.
David?
And then just
Yeah.
like very quickly on that one, Marvin, I didn't
Yeah.
mention TTP specific demands from Pakistan because I was talking specifically about the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistanis and how they're demanding things from one another. And that's, when it comes to TTP, that's the actual blind spot. Who isn't in the room? They can't make their demands on themselves. And the Taliban basically are saying that, hey, we can't negotiate on their behalf. And the Taliban are very kind of cleverly sticking to that, nothing about TTP without TTP on the table sort of a principle. And they're also kind of pushing for this, compliance for compliance type of an arrangement for any negotiated deal, should that happen.
David. You're muted, David.
One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about other countries, and has been only glancingly referenced here, but I think it's important to keep in mind, is the role of the United States. General Munir, as President Trump has said, is his favorite field marshal. The U.S. new U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, Paul Kapoor, had a very warm and friendly meeting with the Pakistani ambassador a couple of days ago, where he said that the U.S. is committed to build an economically entrenched strategic partnership. The U.S. and Pakistan have signed a deal on strategic minerals, and the United States has welcomed the level of counterterrorism cooperation that it has with Pakistan, and it looks to increase it. So, going back to what Javed said about the alleged drone strikes that allegedly transit Pakistan, the likelihood is those are going to continue and even increase. So the United States no longer plays a dominant role in the Pakistani Afghanistan realm, but it still plays a very important role. And Pakistan has played its cards exceptionally well and is right now riding high in the U.S. as opposed to India, its strategic rival, which is not riding that high at all.
David, is the field marshal really the driver here of policy on Afghanistan?
In Pakistan?
Yeah. I mean, is now in effect Afghanistan policy what Munir wants it to be?
I would say there's no question about that. And now he's protected from legal liability for the rest of his life. He's field marshal for life. He no longer has to worry about the Pakistani Supreme Court, because the amendments to the Pakistani Constitution, which were passed, I think, earlier today, have removed the Supreme Court as arbiter of the Constitution. And this new court that will be appointed by the executive will be in charge. So to me, this is, I think it's been the case that the Chief of Army Staff has played the major role in Afghanistan policy. Now it's just clear it's going to be that it's formally that way and very clearly that way, and no one is going to question that. General Munir has done an incredible political job of making himself a hero in Pakistan. As Javed said, Pakistan won that war. And so for Pakistan to have beaten India in a war is something that his predecessors didn't do. He's riding really high. I think he can do whatever he wants.
Okay, now let's get to our questions, some of which have been touched on already. But specifically now, there's reason to believe that there might be facing us now a full-scale war between Pakistan and Taliban's Afghanistan. What are the chances now of this kind of war, and what would be entailed? What would victory look like for either side here?
As we discussed earlier last month, I think most observers, most analysts believe that full-scale war between Afghanistan and Pakistan is unlikely and really impossible. Pakistan is in a position to attack and possibly even decapitate the Taliban, but if they have to enter Afghanistan, then they face the possibility of a guerrilla war, which they are not prepared to deal with, and they were not any more successful. All those years when Pakistan was supporting the Taliban, while the Taliban were killing American troops, they became very aware of what the capabilities of the Taliban were, and now with all the American hardware that the Taliban are able to take advantage of, they would be a tough nut to crack militarily. Certainly, by the same token, it's inconceivable to think that the Taliban can engage in attacks other than terror-style attacks inside Pakistan.
Josh, were you saying?
Yeah. It's it's a good question, and Marvin, I'm not going to say it. But I'm not going to say it's the wrong question. But I think
please try.
When you think about full-scale war, you usually think about conventional forces clashing with conventional forces, and in this case, we have such a wild asymmetry in conventional military capabilities. Pakistan has one of the largest standing armies in the world, very sophisticated capabilities. So I think the real risk of an escalating conflict looks less like force on force conflict and more like a sort of sustained spiral of the kind of back and forth that we are seeing right now. Pakistan effectively can operate in a completely permissive environment in Afghan airspace. It has the ability to use kinetic strikes within Afghanistan in ways that are seen as provocative, and it has options short of sending in ground troops, which I agree would be quite risky, to continue to try to target TTP throughout Afghanistan. And I think the risk is that if it becomes more aggressive in this way, and really, I see it as unlikely that anybody would rein them in. I mean, the Trump administration is not going to tell Pakistan that it can't shoot in Afghanistan when the United States is apparently blowing ships out of the water in multiple theaters. If Pakistan escalates in that way, then I think the risk is that the TTP has even more of a free hand to operate across the border, targeting military and civilian installations and causing a lot of death and destruction in Pakistan. And so that sort of spiral, which is the real risk. And it's not that this is the first time that it's happened, but the last major flare up was about 2 years ago. And I think the risk is that as Pakistan becomes more frustrated by the TTP's attacks and becomes more aggressive in Afghanistan, that this happens not every 2 years, but really creates a spiral of conflict that leads to significant civilian deaths.
Would this greater, particularly putting boots on the ground as a way to finally solve, as far as Pakistan is concerned, the TTT problem, uh, would this unite the Afghans in a way that we should take into account?
I could take that. I think
Please.
Marvin, both sides are playing a very dangerous game of chicken. You got Pakistan on the one hand who wants to look tough, at home, particularly Field Marshal Munir. And it's no longer, perhaps to him arguably about border management with the Taliban, but it's kind of more about dominance, mainly with whatever Munir is doing kind of domestically inside Pakistan by, effectively positioning himself as the Pakistan version of Amir, just like the Taliban Amir. And then you got the Taliban on the other hand, who wants to kind of show that they won't be bullied by anyone, especially by a country like Pakistan, where the Taliban still hold a lot of influence through, their own networks of relationships with not just groups like the TTP or the BLA or others, but also their own religious political parties. And then you got in between, as you mentioned, a lot of Afghans, Taliban and non-Taliban alike, who believe that if there's an open declared conflict with Pakistan, especially if it's declared directly by Pakistan itself, that kind of declared war might actually be better and preferable to them as opposed to an undeclared war that Pakistan has been waging inside Afghanistan for a long, long time. So there is this kind of combustible mix of these, fake nationalism, inflated egos, kind of paranoia, uh, maybe the bad faith and insecurity, all of this kind of coming together. And then, but the good news is that I think at the end of the day, neither side wants a full-blown conflict. And if there is, perhaps no dialogue or a back channel or no hotline between the two sides, and if it's kind of all mixed with paranoia, then one overreaction or misstep, be it from the Pakistani side or the Taliban side or the TTP side, could actually push things over the edge.
Yes, David.
Yeah. When you talk about war, you're talking about the full application of military force that's available to a state. In Pakistan's case, that means nuclear weapons. Pakistan has spent the last 20 plus years developing probably the world's best arsenal of small tactical nuclear weapons that can be used to do things as small as destroy an entire block rather than an entire city. Um, they have made very clear that they have this, and it plays a huge role in their strategic calculus vis-a-vis India. But any kind of armed confrontation with Pakistan and Afghanistan that involved anything more than what we've seen over the last, as Josh pointed out, the last 70 years in terms of cross-border firings would inevitably result in the destruction of the Taliban. The Taliban are not stupid. They know that. So there's not going to be a conventional war or anything close to that because the risks to the Taliban are too great. The Taliban's perspective, as they made clear in their victory over the United States, for example, is not today, tomorrow, next month, or next year. It's generational, it's millennial. They believe that they are anointed by God to rule not just Afghanistan, but to be the creator of a new emirate that is similar to the emirates and the caliphates that were created in the 6th and 7th century. So it's a whole different calculus for the Taliban. Now, the Pakistanis know that. When they did the bombings right after Pataki's visit to India, they bombed two places. They bombed Kabul and they bombed Kandahar. Did they bomb the supreme leader's home in Kandahar? No. Did they bomb the home of any top Taliban official? No. But they made very clear in a very precise, very targeted bombing raid, because the Pakistani Air Force is pretty darn good, that they can kill anybody they want to in Afghanistan. Um, Mullah Habibullah doesn't want to be killed by a bomb. And the Taliban don't want to have that kind of war. So it's going to be, as Josh said, it's going to be a continuing effort on what we would consider non-standard warfare. And the Russians have shown how to do that. I mean, this is a different world. You don't have conventional wars with people marching in. And when they do, as the Russians found in Ukraine, they lose. But then it's replaced by something else. So something else will evolve between Pakistan and Afghanistan. But there's not going to be any kind of major cross-border raid, cross-border incursion. The Pakistanis are too smart to do that, and the Taliban are too smart to risk it as well.
With the intensification of conflict, uh, what are likely to be what is occurring perhaps in terms of its impact on the region, on the insurgencies in the region in particular? Is this going to encourage effort on the part of the several major insurgent groups that are operating in Central Asia, for example?
I'll offer that clearly what India, what Pakistan would like is to have India, if eliminate its support for the TTP and the Baluch, to reduce it. And that balance between the support that India has been providing those groups, the Pakistani Taliban and the Baluch insurgents over the last 30 some years, has gone up and down as the political relationship between Delhi and Islamabad has waxed and waned. So I would expect to see a reduction. I think I think that will work. Pakistan's tactics will work because Pakistan has the upper hand right now, but then it'll rise up again. But again, I don't think it's going to become a major conflict that is going to destabilize either the Taliban or Pakistan.
Are we all agreed that a destabilized Afghanistan is not good news for any of the powers in the region?
I'm not sure if that's the case. I mean, Afghanistan is in a sense already destabilized by the very fact of Taliban supremacy and regime. The last time Pakistani armed forces were operating inside Afghanistan was 25 years ago in support of the Taliban. And this goes back to what David earlier said about the Pakistani conflict with India. Since partition, that conflict between India and Pakistan has been for Pakistan an existential conflict, whether the state is going to survive or not. Much the same as what Ukraine faces now with Russia. And I think as a result of that, Pakistan has, for example, allied itself with the United States as a member of CENTO through the period of Soviet occupation in Afghanistan, and then later very reluctantly in the fight against the first Taliban regime. But it's always had its mind on India and on this notion of strategic depth. And because Pakistan feels outgunned, at least conventionally, by India, that they've had to rely on these militant forces, as a force multiplier to sort of even the score a bit. And so the question is, and I'd like to hear what Arif has to say about this, is whether this situation is encouraging the Army staff, General Munir in the first instance, but the military as a corpus, as the Pakistani military is, to reconsider that orientation and whether or not it is good for Pakistan and for its ultimate survival.
Let me ask whether there's any likelihood now, because there are reports that this may be occurring, that Pakistan has decided to assist the Afghan resistance groups, which have been, on the whole, very ineffective, disunited. Uh, if Pakistan were to throw its weight behind these groups, is it likely to? And if it does, would that make any difference?
And Marvin, let me jump in and just say something about the previous question, and then answer the one
Yeah, sure.
that you
Sure.
just posed. I think I would agree with sort of the direction of David's response here, that there aren't likely to be wider destabilizing effects from this conflict. This could get very bad for Pakistan. It could get very bad for Afghanistan. But it's difficult to see that other stakeholders in the region or globally will care that much. And this is actually a problem. It's actually uh, it is complicating that the United States and Saudi Arabia, and China, and everyone else is not likely to feel like they have a major stake, even if violence in Pakistan ticks up to the levels that we saw um, 10 and 15 years ago, right? And so in some ways, it is complicated and frustrating that this conflict could be relatively sort of contained in that way, but still very, very damaging to Pakistan and Afghanistan. To your question about Pakistan backing resistance groups, I think you have to start fundamentally with the question of who would these people be? There are resistance groups in Afghanistan. They have tended to belong to. They've been regionally focused or ethnically focused in ways that such that they have not had historically had links with Pakistan. In fact, they've often been at odds with the Pakistani leadership. Pakistan has. For years, and I used to joke about this during the course of the Afghan war. Pakistan was always seeking to uh, in theory, to find and install the person I called the mythical Pashtun in leadership in Kabul. That would, of course, be a pro-Pakistan Pashtun who virulently hates India, but is acceptable to sort of the Taliban clerical leadership and is supportive of getting money from the World Bank and other international organizations. It's like the perfect proxy in Kabul. And of course, that person doesn't exist. It doesn't exist today, just as it didn't exist throughout that conflict. So I think the fundamental problem of who would that person be, who would that group be, remains. I do think it's quite likely that Pakistan would be interested in fomenting internal rifts within the Taliban leadership. And I fully expect that they have already tried this and are actively trying this within the Taliban leadership. But the highly insular nature of Hibatullah's leadership system, I think has made it difficult. But that's not out of the question that Pakistan could try to fragment the Taliban leadership in ways that leave them engaging with a more sympathetic part of the Taliban that's not the sort of small core around Habitatullah at the moment.
Can I
Anyone else?
jump in on just very, very quickly? I mean, I tend to agree with Josh on this one. I think the risk associated with any such plan I have personally not seen anything publicly from the Pakistani side officially, at least where they've said, hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to support, however limited that support may be, but we're going to support some kind of an Afghan opposition group. I think if should they decide to do that, the risk will be quite unmanageable for them. It will also require quite a bit of a financial and kinetic military support, which could also soon become unmanageable for them. So the larger challenge here is that there is no Afghan entity on the opposition side that can readily take over or at least come in and kind of take over and still stay hospitable to Pakistani needs, if there is no Taliban tomorrow. Because the problem is that there are multiple Afghan realities on both Taliban and non-Taliban sides that aren't in sync with one another. To me personally, there are two kinds of Afghan opposition, anti-Taliban opposition. One, that's more transactionally opposed to the Taliban regime because they feel or still feel betrayed by the Taliban for breaking promises that are made to them. The other is opposition that's based on certain principle and values. But much of those principle and values, unfortunately, do not hold a meaningful value under the current situation and context. But none of the resistance or opposition group, as they call themselves, have agency. There's no unity of front. None of them command a large-scale constituency or support network on the ground. Unfortunately, there's no organized leadership. There's no organized idea or an organizing idea that galvanizes others to come in. They don't have a staying power like the Taliban do at this point, militarily, even religiously. If you have a group like NRF or the National Resistance Fronts, they are in reality a group that you could actually call not really fighting. Because they aren't on the ground. We haven't yet seen. So their resistance at best is over the horizon, and in this kind of opposition kind of lulls you into this false sense that there is such a thing as anti-Taliban opposition. And I think the space for that horizon for the opposition has also shrunk quite a bit or doesn't exist altogether.
Question for you, Javed. Does this situation of increasing conflict between Pakistan or the Pakistani military and the Taliban, does that create an opportunity for non-Taliban Afghans to get their act together, to organize, to provide, to offer an alternative that might be pleasing enough to the Pakistanis that would encourage them to make that sort of paradigm shift, without which the Taliban would not really be able to survive?
Craig, if I may interject before Javed answers it, I just remembered that I think it was an event in 2022, Mr. Tom West, who was I think the AFPAC representative for the United States at the time, at one of the events, I think it was at USIP, he was asked about the leverages US has if Taliban are not abiding by the Doha Agreement, what could be the, other than the economic incentives. So he hinted on that at the moment, US is not supporting any opposition to Taliban. But he said that the time may come that that may start to happen. And he left it at that. So it just reminded me in the back of my mind, and I'll let Javed go to that.
No, absolutely. I mean, I agree. I mean, there's always an opportunity, whether or not that opportunity is then, capitalized on or taken for Afghans, the non-Taliban Afghans to come together and have that kind of an organizing idea and rally that support among the non-Taliban side to create some kind of a consensus on basic issues that they disagree on that has nothing to do with the Taliban. I think it would be great. Whether or not that will happen, I don't think so. But there will definitely be some anti-Taliban opposition groups that will, likely try at least to seize this very opportunity that's been created by the tensions between the Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban to see if they could actually use that to turn up the heat. Whether that's going to amount to much, I'm not so sure. To me personally, Craig, I think some of the heated statements that are coming out of Pakistan, specifically from Pakistani official like the defense minister, or even the targeted airstrike that they conducted inside Afghanistan is less about hitting TDP targets and more about kind of sending a message to the Taliban, to basically remind them, hey, we are the boss. It's not you who will be calling the shots. And I think one thing that Pakistan could do at this point is convince one or more of the kind of Afghan opposition groups and kind of provide them limited support and maybe facilitate a few attacks in Afghanistan. And then basically Pakistan take over itself, so meaning that they will be used as a kind of sort of as a cannon fodder. And I think that would be the only one way that I personally foresee where one or more of the Afghan opposition groups could come into play with some limited and targeted Pakistani support. Other than that, I don't think so.
Just quickly, fragmentary reports about initial anti-Taliban attacks in the southern Taliban heartland in the last month or two suggests that the Pakistanis are already beginning to do that. Just again at the symbolic level, as is so often the case in South Asia, the political gesturing is often very symbolic.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think this will happen. We'll also see more Pakistani air campaign. We may even see assassination operations that take out senior Taliban leaders. It hasn't yet, but that could happen. And if that happens at a kind of semi-larger level, I think it might create some short-term panic among the Taliban rulers. But the Taliban have this, remarkable, uncanny ability to quickly recover and kind of regenerate their forces, including at the leadership level. So if you have something like that, these kind of kinetic strikes that lead to heavy civilian casualties, however, then all bets are off on the Taliban sides. And then we're likely going to see some kind of a Taliban retaliation, perhaps in collusion with groups like the TTP or BLA or Hafiz Govahadar, most likely in the form of suicide bombings in urban areas in Pakistan, very similar to what we saw yesterday in Islamabad. And I think strangely enough, it will also, create some, anti-Taliban momentum, anti-Pakistan momentum among the non-Taliban Afghan side inside Afghanistan. And on the urban conflict it will be unmanageable for Pakistan, mainly because the Taliban already literally has a martyrdom battalion for this very purpose.
David.
Let me say that again, the likelihood of a Pakistani ground invasion of Afghanistan is zero. Okay, and I'll stick by that, and I'll take any bets to the contrary. What we're having here is we've had in many other places around the world is you have essentially a shadow war where a lot of the work is being done by intelligence agencies. From 1996 to 2001, the Afghan resistance to the Taliban was funded primarily by Iranian, Indian, and to a lesser extent Russian intelligence services. That's come out in a wide variety of books that have been written about that time. What the National Resistance Front has been seeking is U.S. support, but their predecessors didn't get U.S. support after 1991. The U.S. CIA stopped funding Afghan groups in 1991, and India, Iran, and to a smaller extent Russia took up the slack. Clearly, Pakistan is interested in playing in this game. The fairly widely publicized visit of the ISI chief to Turkey in January, February this year, I forget the exact time, to meet with Dostum and other Afghan leaders was a clear signal to the Taliban. This is a mixture of symbolism, as Javed was saying, and a struggle for resources. Right now, no Afghan group that I'm aware of has any significant resources. And so far, no one has really started to fund them. Maybe that will happen. Maybe the Pakistanis will, but that's not going to lead to something happening next week, next year, or next month. These are all long-term strategic movements back and forth, and we'll see that. But what I think is the longer-term strategic goal of the Taliban, not the Afghan Taliban, not the Tehrik Taliban, the Pakistan Taliban, is an Islamic state. And the Taliban victory over the United States, in Afghanistan, which took them almost 30 years from when they started till 2021 when they beat the United States, it was a huge symbol to the Taliban in Pakistan. The Pakistani military, by moving hundreds of thousands of people out of the Swat Valley, out of a number of other areas in the Pakhtun areas of Pakistan, and going in and destroying Taliban infrastructure, had come close to eliminating the TTP infrastructure in Pakistan. It never really did that. They did more than the Israelis did to Hamas in terms of of trying to destroy this insurgent group. They haven't succeeded. So what's the message for the TTP and for the Taliban in Afghanistan? Is that the long-term historical weight of history is moving towards them. It doesn't happen. It's not going to happen this year or next year, but 20 years from now, they believe that Pakistan will be ruled by something similar to the Taliban. They both will be ruled, and then India will be next. I mean, to me, that's a long-term strategic goal. And if you look at what Mullah Habatullah says, read what he says, that sounds an awful like a leader who wants to conquer the entire world. And people think, oh, that's so stupid, nobody can believe it, and they dismiss that. But I think it's important to pay attention to what people say their goals are.
Well,
Yeah.
it's no accident, if I may,
Yeah.
just quickly, it's no accident that Habatullah has chosen the same title as the head of ISIS had when it was in control of territory.
Yeah. Oh, we're running out of time. And since we've now put the United States in the picture, I'm going to ask Arif, why don't you take over the questioning?
I will, Marvin. So yeah, I think one of the key questions is that how are the U.S. strategic interests at stake? We've talked about different players in here, and I think the question is, ever since the Doha Accord and the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, U.S. has been evaluating the Taliban, and it was alluded to earlier by Craig that they have not abided by any of the terms within the Doha agreements as it relates to the safe havens and extremism or use of soil to be used against other allies of US, as was in the Doha agreement. So it begs the question that how is and in May MEI had an event as well. Javed and Josh were there discussing that, evaluating where the needle is in that pendulum for the US, and at what point does US say that there needs to be a fresh approach because the situation has deteriorated enough. So and in that discussion, it was a couple of approaches were discussed. Stability, as Marvin had alluded to in the beginning. There was a question of the principle value-based approach. But what are the strategic interests for now the U.S. that are at stake, and what approach to take is the question. Anybody can start, and we can go across the panel.
I mean, I will say that I'm not convinced that the United States at this moment has a strategic approach to the region. And so I'm not therefore convinced that the resurgence of this conflict foils that strategic approach. It is clear that the Trump administration is pursuing a rapprochement of some kind with Pakistan. David quoted the recent meeting by Paul Kapoor, the Pakistani ambassador. It was actually Pakistan's readout that said that this is an economically entrenched strategic partnership. But I do think that the U.S. has been going along with that language. And there's probably a combination of some vague interest in critical minerals and some vague sense that there's a business opportunity and some sense that there's valuable counterterrorism cooperation. But if you zoom out and look at how the United States in the last few months has approached Pakistan and India, I don't think there's a clear logic to it. I also don't think that there's an obvious transactional dynamic or quid pro quo by which Pakistan has any sort of ability to encourage the United States to give more costly support to Pakistan in terms of intelligence support or counterterrorism support in exchange for something that the United States wants, right? So I do think if you're in the Trump administration, you probably look with some concern on the growing violence within Pakistan. You probably worry about how that might get in the way of some of the objectives that you've publicly talked about with and privately talked about with Field Marshal Munir on critical minerals and other topics. But I don't think that there is concern that this complicates sort of a wider geopolitical strategy, because I don't think that one has yet emerged from this administration.
There
Um,
is one overwhelming goal that the people who I am in contact with in this administration have, and that's to get President Trump the Nobel Peace Prize. I agree with you, Joshua. There's no overall strategic goal or plan here, but getting President Trump the Nobel Peace Prize is something that everybody wants. It's on top of their agenda because that's the thing that President Trump wants. And it pains me to say this as an American. I think we should have a strategic plan, a strategic goals, as Arif was saying, but we don't.
um, I would agree with Josh that U.S. strategic interests in Pakistan are limited, with the exception of the general interest in the whole South Asia relationship with China and our concerns in containing China. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, for the Pakistanis, because of their concerns vis-a-vis India and this existential threat, they see the United States as their key bulwark, and they have succeeded over the past 75 years of cultivating U.S. officials up to the highest level through a variety of means, but often very personal contacts with intelligence officials in particular, diplomats, political officials. And certainly the Pakistanis have a unique talent for developing the kind of personal relationships that will tend to affect foreign policy. And so that they have done that, and they're in the process of doing that. And it's interesting because 2 months ago there was a little talk about, or a month and a half ago, there was talk about U.S. looking more favorably upon the Taliban because of Bagram. And I think that has now been completely overcome by the Pakistani elements, and particularly in terms of supporting the quest for a Nobel Peace Prize. So there are still, however, elements within the, let's say, the administration's constellation that, for maybe their own personal interests or other reasons, are trying to lobby for U.S. Backing for the Taliban, certainly in the diplomatic sphere. But I think that the Pakistanis have managed to succeed in that, and even to the extent at which it appears that the initial warm relationship between this administration and the Modi government in India have been to some large extent reversed. So, and a lot of these relationships tend to happen on a personal level, that is under the table. So it's very important to watch not what people say, but actually what they do.
I'll have to disagree with Craig on the importance of the United States for Pakistan, because I would say, from my own experience, the most important relationship that Pakistan has had over the last 75 years is with China. And I can certainly say that's what the Chinese say. If you look at what's been in the Chinese press lately, of course, they're not happy about the U.S. Agreement with Pakistan on Pasni. China has invested much more in Gwadar. But what the Chinese are saying, both publicly and I assume privately as well, is you can count on us through thick and thin. We're not going to sanction you the way the U.S. did in the 1990s. We're not going to pull out of your interest in 1989 the way we did. You can always count on China. And Pakistan has been able to always count on China. And if you drive down the street in any major Pakistani city, you'll see a lot more signs in Chinese than you might expect. China and Pakistan have an enduring relationship that is, as Chinese like to say, closer than skin and teeth, or teeth and gums, or something like that. I forget the Chinese phrase. So that's the most important relationship. The United States is the most visible, but China is the most important.
Javed, you
I
wanna?
don't disagree, by the way, with that.
And
I
then
mean,
we have a
I
follow-up
agree.
question.
Yeah.
We'll, I think, get into some of the points that are being raised. But Javed, go ahead, you answer, and then we'll go into the next question, which has to do with the great power rivalry aspect of it.
Yeah,
But go ahead, Javed.
I tend to agree with Craig's point about the charm offensive, that the Pakistani military and some of the civilian leaders close to them often put out. I think it's kind of widely under discussed. They could literally talk you into submission, and in some ways, they have with the current administration now. With the Army Chief, Field Marshal Munir coming in and holding a box with minerals, which is nothing to do. So he's not Pakistan's chief economist or their trade representative, but they're still doing it. So the thing is that every time we think about, or some of us say that Pakistan has outlived its usefulness to the United States. Some of us are proven wrong because we see things like this. The challenge right now, to me personally, is that we still can't quite pin down what U.S. policy towards Pakistan is, or even what U.S. policy towards the Taliban is. And maybe in some ways they are still hyphenated. It's very unclear to me. But both sides still want something from Washington, and that is leverage to me. Pakistan craves U.S. military support. Still, they maintain a very good relationship. David was mentioning how Field Marshal Munir has been kind of touted here by President Trump as his favorite field marshal, and maybe all favorite relationships, including those with field marshals, have an expiration date, and maybe this will also have an expiration date. Especially if, say, tomorrow India comes in and they offer something to the United States, and this very favorite relationship will effectively fade away, or maybe not. So, but there's still a lot of hype around some of the things that he created. Also about recent U.S. promises of investment in Pakistan's energy and critical minerals. Whether those critical minerals or energy oil reserves are there or not is a whole different issue. And then you got the Taliban side, who also craves international legitimacy. And I think they were very willingly trade, counterterrorism support to the United States, counterintelligence cooperation with the United States, particularly about lone wolves and others, for their own political survival and political security. And so that is kind of the opening that I personally see for the United States. The question now is, how do you tie all of this together, where the U.S. could, quietly leverage economic and political incentives to push both sides, Pakistan and the Taliban, to exercise restraint immediately, but also somehow, maybe rein in the TTP, which is not part of the equation between the two sides directly. Perhaps, by bringing in others, reopening counterterrorism channels through, intermediaries like Qatar, or open some limited space for U.S. counterterrorism presence, as Craig was mentioning, on the ground in Afghanistan, background. Let's say some kind of limited presence, or maybe bring in regional players, perhaps even China, into some kind of a direct dialogue framework that's focused on border stability, right? Would the U.S. do that? I don't know. But these are some of the openings. The problem is that right now the United States is watching from the sidelines, and maybe that's intentional. I'm also afraid that the Trump administration may even kind of sit this very tension out, altogether. Not perhaps maybe involve itself if it gets out of control. But I think sooner or later, the U.S. will have to step in. And when it does, I think it will be very important, in my view, to resist, the temptation to overreact and just kind of stay neutral.
Thanks, Javed.
It's interesting, Javed, that the main diplomatic force attempting to bring Pakistan and the Taliban back together has been Turkey and Turkey and Qatar, the two most Muslim Brotherhood friendly countries in the world.
Yeah. And I don't think when it comes to maybe mediation, the Taliban would agree in that case with the non-Muslim country.
I'm sorry to break in, but we're really running out of time. So if you don't mind.
Yeah. Sure. I'll go to the next question, which is a good segue. So Javed, you were saying that maybe U.S. is deliberately watching from the sidelines. As it relates to the great power rivalry, so how are China and Russia looking at this Pakistan-Afghanistan conflict? Obviously, China has CPEC to worry about, which are being attacked by BLA and TTP, mostly BLA, and supported by India. Then they have investments in Afghanistan as well. Russia has recognized the Taliban, but I think most of their concern is coming out of the extremists from there. And then we have the US-Pakistan reset around these various aspects, the trade, the crypto we have discussed, and there is the Middle Eastern role. So if there is a hard border on Indian side, like David Sidney was mentioning, and a hard border on Afghanistan side, none of this can materialize the US-Pakistan reset. So what does the panel think about this at the great power rivalry angle to the whole thing?
Well, 5 days ago, 6 days ago, President Trump met with all the heads of the Central Asian countries, the so-called C5+1. That's a meeting that in earlier administrations, those of us who worked in those administrations on Central Asia had hoped to see something like that at the White House, but it happened. The centerpiece of that, at least according to the press, was all about strategic minerals. But certainly Russia and China will have seen this as trespassing on turf that they've spent a lot of effort to try and build up their influence on over the last 30, 300, whatever time frame you want to use. So it's still ongoing. What I would urge, though, is that, and this is from my perspective in Washington, it might be a work perspective, I'm sure it's biased, there is no overall strategic plan that the United States has. Even if there are people who individually have strategic ideas inside this administration, that's very different than having an overall strategic plan that is being carried out by an effective National Security Council, an effective State Department, and an effective an effective Department of Defense. I don't mean Department of War, I mean Department of Defense. That's not there now. So I really caution all my friends from other countries who are seeking these strategic thoughts and plans and motivations to refrain from that. And it's all situational. It's based on things like President Trump's fascination with strategic minerals. He's been fascinated by them for three decades, by his quest for a Nobel Peace Prize. But these are not strategic geopolitical thoughts. So anyway, I'll get off my hobby horse on that. But I really urge people if you look for something that's not there and you find it, that's your problem, not the problem of the United States for not having it.
I would just add to that you can believe two things at the same time. You can believe that sort of as David suggested, this is what we're seeing between Pakistan and Afghanistan is not really integrated into a wider geopolitical game, and that's probably not the right lens in which to see it. And you can also believe at the same time that this conflict and the prospect of dramatically rising violence within Pakistan is and ought to be really worrisome to China, right? That China's interests, investments, engagement with Pakistan make it a stakeholder in Pakistan's success, or at the very least in Pakistan not being consumed by the kind of violence that it faced for nearly a decade, right? And I think both of those things can be true. We shouldn't see this through a macro geopolitical competitive lens, because I don't think that's what is going on here. But that each great power has its own sort of parochial reasons to be concerned about what this violence might bring for its own interests.
Two quick points. The Chinese, whose economic interests, relations with both countries are greater than pretty much anybody else's, they were the initial ones to try and bridge this dispute, and they failed. As far as Russia is concerned, I think that Russia has a much deeper relationship with the Taliban than meets the eye, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I also see it that way. I think China and the Russians are playing a very cautious game. They generally talk a big game, but act quite small, or maybe not even enough to get their hands dirty, especially the Chinese. They haven't yet involved themselves directly or even indirectly in these very tensions between the Taliban and Pakistan. No, back channel diplomacy to negotiate some kind of, peace or, ceasefire. I think both countries, Craig mentioned, have also made significant inroads in Afghanistan. With the Taliban, they've extended their security ties with the group. My view internally is that within Afghanistan, Russia and China generally inspire confidence among the businessmen, Taliban or the corporate Taliban, who, see investment potential in China and Russia. But when it comes to the Taliban clerics and their hardliners, those who are sitting in Kandahar, I think they're suspicious of engagement with them, likely because there's no trust or, shared language established between the two sides, no common worldview. They're also suspicious because they don't know exactly what the Chinese or the Russian intentions are in Afghanistan. So,
And both countries have large Muslim populations that they repress.
yes, but
It does have a
not
large Muslim
connected,
population. They've pretty much taken care of that, I think.
but not connected to one another. Yeah.
No,
Marvin, do you want to take it from here, depending on
Well,
considering the time?
well, we've already run to the end of our time, and we didn't get into a discussion of India the way we should have, unfortunately. So we have such a loquacious group here that there's no way to avoid that, I guess. And I also want to apologize because we've got some very good questions here from Kerry Douglas and Shah Mahmood Mikhail and David Katz and an anonymous questioner. I think we may have touched on some of that. We did mention nuclear weapons. We have talked about China. Uh, and so I'm sorry that I greatly apologize for not getting to what are some good questions here. But you're unstoppable as a discussion group, and I want to thank Arif Ansar for his participation in this and the support of Politic once again with MEI.
Thank you.
Uh, I'll just conclude by saying, personally, I don't see that there's in this confrontation between Afghanistan and Pakistan. I don't see that there's going to be any military solution to this, and there's not going to be a diplomatic solution to it. But we're back in that familiar place where we say, well, we're just going to, as we go along now, we're just going to have to manage the conflict as best we can. And let me say in that connection that the U.S. may play a role in that, but so might the neighbors in there because they're in a unique position here to be able to create incentives for both Pakistan and Afghanistan uh, to bring about regional cooperation, which would so benefit both countries. So let me stop there, and I hate to do it because this could really go on for a while, and I think we'd all profit greatly from that. So thank you to our wonderful panelists and for the understanding on the part of the people who have raised questions, and wishing you all a good day and keep watching Afghanistan and Pakistan and India and the rest. I know the Middle East is a magnet now here for attention, but I just see a dynamic taking place in the area that we're interested in here that's going to command a lot of attention in the near future. So thanks again to everybody. Have a good day.